So we will re-adjourn now, and just recapping that those funding requests will come back to those to consider them as part of the whole picture after we've worked through any other items that have been raised as a result of management comments going back to submissions that have been made that didn't directly relate to the consultation topics. So I've got a bit of a list in front of me which we'll work through, and then obviously if any councillors have any other items they would like to raise, we will provide the opportunity to do that as well. So kicking off with a bit of an infrastructure theme, and just wanting to discuss, we did have several submitters make comment on the need for an upgrade in Maraenui in their street lighting. So just wanting to put that on the table for deliberations and ask council officers what capacity we might have to be able to do some work in this area and then open up for councillors to debate. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you. So, through with the regard to Maraenui lighting.
So I guess perhaps what is currently in the plan for when, and what sort of capacity or flexibility do we have to do more sooner?
So the requirement will be for infilling. Most of the street lights in Maraenui are attached to unison power poles, and the spacing is a little bit inconsistent through some of the streets. Same in Piramai and parts of Mariwa too, but we've, I think, been better in the past at infilling those gaps. There's also a lot of street trees which have been cut underneath the power pole, the power lines, and it's kind of caused them to branch out. So you add that with the inadequate spacing, and that's the problem we've got. We do have funds within our standard renewals and operations budget. We could certainly get the job done a lot quicker with a specific budget. It's not a huge number. I don't have the number of poles that we would have to add into the area, but I could hopefully get it by the end of this session. A rough estimate anyway, but certainly a certain amount of that work, the worst spots could be done through existing operational budgets.
Thank you. Councillor McGrath.
Yes, through the chair. Robin, have we gone through the likes of Maraenui and upgraded to LED?
Through you, Chair, yes, we tried to do Maraenui first for the low volume streets, so that's the pedestrian category lighting. Part of the reason for that was so that we could get a better understanding of what the shortfalls were in that network. So once we had the LEDs in, then we can actually see what's going on properly, and we'll have a proper understanding of what we need to do to bring some of those streets up to standard.
So just to follow on from that, there is a standard that we have to meet, or a regulation that we're supposed to hit?
A number of regulations, yeah. There's an Australia-New Zealand standard for street lighting, and then there's also NZTA, and there's a very good Auckland standard as well, which we try and work to.
And just to follow up to that, how does the suburb of Maraenui compare to the rest of Napier? Is it sitting better or worse as far as hitting the regulations?
In terms of meeting those requirements, it is probably the worst area. I don't know the history of it, but certainly where we've got a lot of our street lights on power poles in other parts of the city, we've got infill lighting supporting that. We don't seem to have that in Maraenui. So I don't know the history there, I'm afraid.
Councillor Bogue.
Yes, thank you very much, Robin. Yes, I think another exacerbating factor is the fact that there's a lot of empty sections, so there aren't lights coming from houses, which also makes the place darker. But I wondered, one of the issues that's raised consistently, and I don't know if it's I don't think it's council responsibility, but the shopping centre, there's very erratic lighting there, and people do worry about, doing classes at night and walking along the shopping centre, which is very dark. Do you got any comment on that, Robin?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. Shopping centre is obviously privately owned, and under veranda lighting is traditionally privately owned as well. We're obviously undertaking some work in the car park area and the park over the next sort of 6 months. We have looked at floodlighting from the park side to try and get underneath the verandas, but it would be pretty glary and pretty unpleasant for everybody using the area legitimately. We have also explored the idea of under veranda lighting, just as a supplementary to the public lighting. It's not out with our area of responsibility to do that, but generally we rely on private businesses and landowners to do that.
Councillor Tapney.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. Robin, when you mentioned about a separate budget line in order to help expedite the work with continued assessment and replacing of lighting, does that also include the tree work? Because I know for a lot of, you mentioned around the trees, while we do have some lighting in that suburb, trees are obscuring quite a bit of light, particularly along Bledisloe Road. And while Councillor Bogue has mentioned the retail sector and that those are normally the domain of the property owners, there is still that safety and wellbeing aspect that we have as a council that I'd like to see us reinforce. And so my first question is, do you need a separate line of budget for the tree work that's required, or is that incorporated into your work? Let's start with that.
Simple questions. Yes, we do have budget lines for trimming trees around street lights and power lines. The trimming of the ones under the power lines, we get, I think Unison pay the first trim. Everything after that is down to the tree owner. So we do have to keep on top of that. It may come down to a point though where we start to lose street trees to be able to achieve the lighting standard, and that's probably where we will have to come back to the community and establish what the most important is. Probably not the right trees, to be honest. On Bledisloe Road, for instance, we could do better, but the unison, the overhead power, doesn't help generally.
So by extension then, as you go through those assessments, better defining that challenge, we have received in the past comments from residents around the particular variety of trees in Maraenui and the ongoing concerns they have both from an infrastructure, blocking of drains, etc., but also from a health. So is there a corresponding piece of work that as we identify how the tree impacts on the spread of light, that we also tag it as a potential removal?
Yes, through Your Worship. Yes, we do go through that process, and also we are aware that certain species are, I guess, more welcome in the community than others. The Parks and Reserves team have got a street tree list, which is what we should be planting rather than necessarily what we have been planting in the past and what we're maintaining now. So that's got more of an awareness of that sort of whole impact on the community.
Thank you.
So I guess I'm hearing, Councillor Wright.
It just seems to me that if we have a community that is requesting that we deal with insufficient lighting in their community and that the trees have been identified as part of the problem, that maybe we should be directing you to start that consultation with the community as soon as possible around the possible removal and replacement of more suitable tree species.
And
through you, Madam Mayor, I think I just want to point out that I think that there is still some work to be done to ascertain obviously how many poles we need to infill, what trees, if any, are required, and absolutely take the point that they're related, but just think that we need to do some more scoping work here as well.
I suggest that we actually provide direction to officers to undertake further analysis of both infill lighting and a potential tree replacement program with a view to prioritising the improvement of Maraenui lighting.
In consultation with the community, could that be added, please? In consultation with the community.
Where we are proposing to remove trees.
what you're suggesting, which was an overall look at the
I
trees.
think I don't actually know, well, and as much as we all know I love consultation, I think if we're actually working towards some standards and some regulations, I think we need to do an assessment ourselves first, particularly with regards to the infill lighting, and establish, that's something that can be council-led. And then the follow-on from that around trees, appreciating that although the trees are an issue in Maraenui, we also know that people get very upset when we talk about removing them. So I think perhaps we identify where there might be some problem areas in the first instance, and then undertake some consultation around anything that we're proposing to remove.
That's fine.
Supplementary question, if I may, Your Worship. So, a question to staff. This is really a follow-up. Could I have the framework that you referred to around the criteria of where we determine the priority of the streets that require lighting? You talked about those that have certain pedestrian use, etc., etc. Could you circulate or make available that framework so that I can understand the rationale that our staff go through when determining which streets meet our criteria? Because what I heard in your statement was, yes, we started the work on replacing LEDs in Maraenui, and it made a huge difference, by the way, for those areas where the lights were put in. But I also heard that that was determined upon pedestrian volumes, traffic volumes, and other criteria. And so what streets within that suburb meet that criteria and therefore are eligible for the work that we're trying to activate?
Through you, Madam Mayor. The street lighting categories basically fall into streets will fall into one of two categories. There's the VCAT, which is the vehicle category, and the PCAT, which tends to be the suburban low volume streets. We put a lot more design effort into the V category lights, which is the stuff that's going out at the moment. So you'll have seen we've just done Kennedy Road and there's Shakespeare Road. So some of those higher volume roads are just being done now. The criteria selecting between them is fairly dry. I'm happy to share it, obviously, but it's vehicle volumes, amount of retail activity on the sides, and just the sort of width of the road. So if you've got a dual carriageway, obviously you need taller poles and brighter lights.
So, supplementary question, please, Your Worship. I know that since 1980, members of this community have been coming to council and petitioning for better lighting in Maraenui, and it's not because we want to be able to see the street, it's because of safety. There are a lot of dark patches, and we've heard from a number of people who live outside of Maraenui, when you look over the landscape of our city, Maraenui is visibly different at night, there's less light. When you are walking and driving in those suburbs, it is distinctly unsafe. And so we've heard a number of concerns. And so what I didn't hear in that criteria was safety and whether or not we referred to the police around any incidences or areas of concern for the police or hotspots, etc., etc.
So just
So the reason why I'm going down this line is because I don't think we established, we were talking about the trees, and the trees sound pretty innocuous, they're just blocking light, but actually they're also creating opportunities for harm because of the shade and dark patches that they're creating. And so I wanted to establish that link between why we're focusing, well, why I was focusing so much on the trees, because there has been some great lighting put in place, but the trees have undermined that work. And so safety is still a concern.
Councillor Crown.
With you, Councillor Price. I feel like I understand where you're coming from, Councillor Tapini, but I'm wondering whether this is getting incredibly operational in the detail that you're listing. So, and in trying to find some sort of solution, I wonder whether us as council has been presented with the work program in regards to lighting might satisfy what you're looking for, because we all know our communities and our wards really well. and would be able to perhaps assess whether the work program meets the needs of those communities rather than delving into the criteria and those very operational details that our officers deal with on the daily.
Yeah. So just to recap, we have directed council officers to do the analysis around required infill and at the same time assess potential tree removal to assist with making the lighting and much safer in the Maraenui community. And just to appendix to that, for that analysis to be brought back to councils to gain an understanding of the work that will be undertaken.
Yep.
Councillor McGrath, Executive first.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it just might be useful before we close out for anybody watching online to note that council officers do meet every fortnight with police. We run through our entire portfolio, which includes lighting, and we get feedback about issues of safety across the portfolio. Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor McGrath.
I'm just wondering if we can put in there, or whether it's appropriate or not, to use the word priority or prioritise this area.
I think
Sure.
we did already have that in the wording. Yep. Prioritise lighting in Maraenui. Provide direction to officers to undertake further analysis of infill lighting, tree removal, and prioritising lighting in Maraenui, and bring back to council the work to be undertaken. Councillor Brown.
I hope I'm not being too nitpicky. The first time you said it, you said tree replacement, and I'm just wondering, because trees do give us oxygen that help us breathe, so just wondering, is there better placed trees that could go in there, or do these trees actually have to be removed?
Just say tree removal / replacement.
Yeah. Sorry.
No pun intended.
Thank you, Robin. And before you disappear, the next one I think will probably fall within your area of responsibility too. So we've had a few of us raise the Puketitari Road and the safety concerns and issues there. There is planned work, I believe, between the years 2 and 8, and we do, of course, also have the recommendation to reduce the speed limit to 80 kilometres as part of our current review we're doing of speed limits. I will just open up in case there's any specific questions that councillors have with regards to this. Is there a desire to fast track some of the work required on the road? Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
Thank you, Robin. This is something I'm just particularly aware of. I remember my first year on council, which is probably 8 or 9 years ago now, we made a commitment to some submitters around this being in our 5-year plan to do this work, and we're currently pushing it out to year 8 of the LTP, and we've heard a number of concerns out there. So I suppose I just need a level of certainty that we're doing it at the pace we possibly can. I understand it's a really complex piece of road in terms of land acquisitions to be done, but is there anything we could do better? I know it's widely used by cyclists and it's a very narrow stretch of road and people are concerned, so appreciate the effort you're making in terms of recommending speed reductions, but just looking for a bit of certainty.
Yeah, and through your worship, we did undertake quite a lot of work in the previous 2 LTP periods. There was a lot of design work done in the 2012 LTP, 2015. 2018, we have been spending most of that time trying to get the business case past NZTA so that they would fund half of it. That hasn't been successful, just because I guess the priorities for government have been slightly off that, and we haven't been able to make a business case stick. The solution we've come up with is to do it in stages as isolated programs, and that is now funded by NZTA. So we were looking at 6 to 7 million unfunded. We're looking probably closer to 8 million now, but it will be funded by NZTA. I have to put a little asterisk, subject to confirmation of funding in possibly September from them.
And just, sorry, while I have you, when will we start seeing, I suppose, physical works occurring on that stretch?
Year 2, hopefully.
Year 2. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor, if I could just add to that, we have also been working with the Mission Development around their proposals with regard to their block of land, which will have an impact on our roading network in that area. And so there's a bit of work to do there to integrate their plans with our plans and how intersections might be treated in that regard. So that is a critical piece of work that needs to be taken into account as we move forward.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. It's principally my concern is that we've got this arterial route. It's got a large number of residents on it. It was meant to have been done in the last long-term plan, and is now in this long-term plan and looking at to be extended over. And I think we've got to be really careful because as a council we keep talking about moving, expanding to the west, and yet we're not putting infrastructure in there to support that. I think we have to be very mindful. We've also had a large number of residents talk to us through our rate review processes about capital expenditure on infrastructure out in those environments. So we do need to be mindful that, unless we invest, we can't actually achieve some of the objectives that we are setting as a council.
Councillor Tapani.
Question for John, please, Your Worship. John, while I understand the value of ensuring there's coordination between the mission work and the Paraiti work, does one hinge upon the other? Will one prevent the other from progressing? If we don't make progress with the mission estate with regards to conversations, will that hinder our ability to work on the Paraiti solutions?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Excuse me. That's a curvy one. The better solution for that part of the roading network does require a horizontal and vertical curve realignment, i.e. we need more land to create a better solution for traffic safety in that space. So I would say yes. I'd also point out that we have discussed the Pukatitu Road project publicly, ongoing for quite some time now, a number of years, with regard to the funding that was made available in the 2015 long-term plan being insufficient, and that's why we went down the route of seeking NZTA support for the project. And that is why it hasn't progressed further to date, and why we now have a staged approach to that project. So yes, it's challenging. It's a very difficult environment in which to augment an existing road alignment with regard to it's in a gully. The road boundaries are narrow, too narrow to achieve what we want to achieve in the current public roading environment. So that requires augmentation in that space, and that's going to be challenging.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There were quite a few roading issues mentioned by the cycling advocates who spoke to us, if it's appropriate for me to mention those. One of them that I noticed myself is the way in which the grids, what is it called? Where the drain covers are parallel to the road, and that requires cyclists to cycle all the way around it with the danger of getting your wheels caught in them, which is a real safety issue. Is there any attempt being made to look at those in terms of cycle safety across the city? Because I could name a couple right now.
Through Your Worship, those grates are being phased out. We have a couple of options for replacing just the grate lids with a sort of crisscross type of thing. It's actually got more capacity as well. Hopefully, I'm a bit worried that you can name a couple straight off the top of your head, but we should be phasing those out and as they get replaced. It's an operational replacement now. We're sort of working through them as we come across them.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Tapani.
Sorry, Robin, just a follow-on question. again around recognising identified corridors which have heavier cyclist use. Are those given some extra or priority attention around replacement regimes, or is it just a matter of when it breaks, we'll replace it?
Through Your Worship, no, it is prioritised.
Thank you.
Just to summarise there, in terms of Puketitiri Road in particular, I'm not seeing that there's any specific action other than perhaps to elaborate on some of the management comments to provide any concerned residents with some more detail around what is in stream. And again, with regard to Councillor Bogue's point, perhaps with that, I think it was one submitter in particular that raised that, again, just to provide them with some further detail about the work that is going to be undertaken. I'm feeling like we might want to give Robin a break. Get somebody else up here.
He's been waiting for this moment.
waiting for this.
Let's go, Robin.
Okay, so if we keep in the road safety and cycling theme, I'd like to bring up the submission from Taradale High School and Leaderslow Primary School, which I once again want to acknowledge all the work they put into it. It was fantastic. And I would be very keen to know if there is still the ability to apply for any of the Safer Schools funding from Waka Kotahi to perhaps undertake some work in that area.
So in response to that, we are of the understanding that all that funding has now been allocated. We were able to snatch a second bit to supplement the money we'd already had for West Quay and the Safe Routes to School. It may be a Crown-funded thing in the future. Certainly nothing similar has been flagged, and we do know that the pressure on NZTA's National Land Transport Fund is more extreme than we've ever had in the past, and we're expecting cutbacks. So I wouldn't have thought in the first year or two they will be running any of these sort of 90% funding activities, but I don't know. But no, there's certainly no confidence at the moment that that fund or a very similar one will be available in the first couple of years.
So bearing in mind that's not an option, and just testing this with councillors, I'm quite concerned about, what we were hearing yesterday, and I would like to see this area prioritised for whether it be a local area traffic plan or some sort of project to try and address the issues that we have there. So.
Yeah.
Lots of nodding. And Councillor Tapani.
So I concur with your comments, Your Worship. Thank you, through you. We would also love to see an opportunity for those submitters to work with our team to perhaps trial a couple of solutions. The shared lane, for example, I know while it has some complexities around it, there is, I think, for us, we need to shift our focus from, or start at least shifting our focus to a more cycle and active physical space into the future, and that means addressing some of the criteria we use to assign some of our resources and efforts in the now. And I'm cognizant that there are, for example, those shared lanes where for certain hours of the day it is set aside for either cycles or parking. And so would love to see an opportunity where we can grow some, if NZTA is no longer a funding option, perhaps I know our team have mentioned that they're keen to trial different projects or test concepts, and so I'd welcome an opportunity to work with those schools around testing some objects or some concepts.
Yes, through Your Worship, just a point of clarification is most of our work programme for improvement works is still going to be funded partly by NZTA. What I was saying a minute ago is that we're unlikely to get the sort of extreme funding that we've just had, which was 90% of them and 10% of us. That was obviously really nice for the city to be able to deliver those things at virtually no cost to us. So there will still be NZTA involvement and funding assistance. In respect to the submitters and the work they did, I've only watched about 5 minutes of it. I haven't managed to watch all of it yet. But yeah, we would certainly we would work with the schools regardless, and the exercise we've done on Napier Hill with Sacred Heart Girls High and Central has kind of prepared us for working with multiple schools who've got different times and things. So we've got those engagements underway. We will turn to Taradale next and see what we can go.
Thank you, Robert.
So in terms of action, to direct council officers to engage with the Taradale-based schools around potential safety initiatives in the Murphy-Mayani Road area.
And just to add to that, and work with the submitters as well.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll just ask the Director of City Services to give an update on the matter of the trees blocking the traffic lights. Thanks.
Through you, Madam Mayor, being slightly smaller than their arbors, the tree is blocking the traffic lights severely. It is a private tree, so the arbors respect to the owner today and will remove the limbs tomorrow morning at 6. The ones, there's another one on Meani Road, Guppy Road as well, is quite bad, so we'll do that next week early in the morning, which will have no restriction to the traffic or the stone store.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
May I raise one other issue? I'm not quite sure whether this is the right department or not. Sorry, can I raise another issue? The Hawke's Bay Regional Council asked us for more covered bus shelters, and I just wondered what our plan is for that, and if I'm talking to the right person, Robin.
Through your worship, yep, that is our area. The bus stop infrastructure, signs, poles, shelters are all owned and installed by council. Obviously the service itself is run by the regional council, so we do work with them. We have an annual fund for supporting that, and that's continued right through this long-term plan as well. So we have an amount, it's a nominal amount of $50,000 a year for public transport infrastructure. There is some movement in the local space for buses. There will be a trial of an on-demand service in Hastings, and then the following year they are talking about trialling that in Napier, and then just retaining the express route, so the core Napier to Hastings route, probably the one that comes here as well. That will have very, very different requirements for infrastructure. So while we are continuing to provide shelters when we're asked, we are a little bit hesitant to put too much stuff in at the moment, because an on-demand service would probably get us building some hubs where people could come, park their bikes and get the bus from there, for instance. Plus we do have legislative difficulty in terms of locating bus shelters particularly, because they are individually identified in the Local Government Act as something we need to get permission from residents on. So they can be a challenge. But yes, it's all still in there.
Cool. Councillor McGrath?
No, that was covered very clearly by Robin, thank you. Yeah, just acknowledging that the bus system is changing. Yeah.
And just through the Mayor, just noting that some of the commitments and funding through NZTA have already been made for next year, so to reprioritise may need some further work by the team, just to let you know that may require us to come back to Council as well.
Okay, moving on to another, probably perhaps the most consistent theme that came through in a number of submissions was with regards to the program of work and what our plan was to address climate change. So I'd like to put that on the table and have already had a conversation with council officers with regards to this and what additional resource may be available within our existing budgets. So yeah, I'd like to welcome Richard up to speak to this.
Thank you. I think it's
what I was hoping to do is just give some brief thoughts around climate change before launching into the resourcing of it. It can mean many things to many people, and we've had these kind of things come through before, like sustainability and those kind of concepts. And if I asked you all around the table, you'd probably have a slightly different view of what climate change meant. So I think I was hoping at the beginning to just give our latest thinking, I guess, as to what it actually means. And hopefully everyone's got the password, so I can draw on here for a second.
Might be able to see that in the live stream, will they?
So, you want to move this to me?
Comes with the camera.
And
No, I can't see it.
for us, there's sort of two parts to the climate change concept, and one is a kind of like an international call to for climate change. So we've got this concept of climate change advocacy. So if I put that on that side, the climate change, world action is on one side, and on this side is like emissions reduction and those sorts of really big issues that we're all kind of every city and every place is trying to deal with. So and we should be no different. Emissions and sort of the idea of leadership and advocacy of institutions like the council and the regional council, and those kind of calls for a climate emergency to be called. It doesn't actually mean that there is a specific thing that you're measuring yourself against, but it does mean that there's a call to action, that this is a serious business. So that's sort of on this side as well. And I'd put in the kind of the public-facing leadership of the issue. Yeah? Or visible leadership. Then on the other side, we've got Napier, and what does that mean in terms of climate? So this is no longer the world, this is us focusing on ourselves. So climate, I guess, Napier. And we know that that conversation's actually been almost longer than the idea of climate change, and that kind of national identity that's been given. Why I say that is because this area has been dealing with coastal erosion for a long, long time, been thinking about that for a long, long time, and has put a lot of energy and effort into that. So that's one of the major areas that, as a council, that we're involved in as well, into the coastal erosion program. And with that, also the inundation. And then we're also thinking about what we have already developed as a city, which we have little control of, so in terms of where development has been to date. But what we do have also control of through our district plan are things like, where we develop into the future. And I think that, one of the outcomes, the key outcomes for the district plan, as difficult as it has been, as we've unravelled it, is to try and get our development to go into the hills and off the plains, which is all in this sort of side. So that's, the planning of the urban form. So this side really, this side is sort of an advocacy role, and this side is resilience and adaptation. And what I would say is that all of this is not a person. This is like a culture in the organisation, and
there's no part that we can't really do this unless all our service directorates are joined and have that, particularly on this side, are making sure that that's woven into each other as a culture, you know. And again, the leadership of this is all you people around the table, as well as what we do as an organisation. So I think that's where we're at with our latest thinking. And in terms of the resourcing, I think what I'm asking is that we elevate the conversation away from a person resource and into thinking about how are we resourcing these things, because this is where the rubber hits the road, if you like, for us around, you know, what we're doing for Napier. And Napier has some serious challenges around climate change, around its resilience, and certainly in terms of being bold and brave in terms of being able to adapt to it. Steph, would you like to add some further thoughts?
Kia ora. Thank you, Richard. And through you, Madam Mayor, I think I would just add on the right-hand side of the board, Natasha's work as her Manager of Community Strategies and adding, I suppose, a social adaptation lens to climate. So thanks, Richard. I don't have much to add other than just the work that Council does with the community every day and our ability to get some grassroots leadership in the discussion. Thank you.
Councillor Crown. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks for that, Richard. When I was going through the submissions, I thought that we had actually missed a trick, because what you've presented today is definitely my understanding of how we operate in regards to climate change, and that it is a culture, that it is a lens that we apply to everything that we do, that's how we assess our projects, that's how we assess our work programs. But we missed a trick in being explicit about that in the consultation documents. So I think that's a really thorough but kind of simple way of describing it, because when I reflected on the work that we do, there isn't ever a time that I feel like we don't consider climate change or the environment or sustainability. So I feel like it was a little bit of a mismatch in our communication rather than in our ethos or our operations.
Perhaps can I make a comment about that? That is, to me, the joining of this with this. And we need to be, as you say, a lot more explicit about what we're doing in there, in the public arena, around how these two things interface. Yeah.
And through you, Madam Mayor, I think what Councillor Crown has summarised here is exactly, I suppose, the point that we've tried to make today, in the sense that most of Council's business line items are in fact dealing with the changing climate. Richard's point here is about the leadership that we show and the visibility that we give to it across all of our business items. I would suggest, though, that there is a matter of resourcing to be discussed with respect to someone who brings this together and gives it the profile that it needs. And like many aspects of council, it's the point of contact for others to get into the many different business units that we do. So our relationships with HBRC and other councils and community members, we can be opaque at times because of the multiple business units that we have. So having a point of contact for people to engage with people and for people to engage with us. Those of you around the table will know that I am pretty passionate about changing climate and have made some, have made some changes in the way that we're thinking. But at the moment, it just needs to be brought to life and be visible. I think that's what our submitters were asking as well.
Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
Thank you for that, Steph. You've hinted at the need for some resourcing to bring that all together. In my notes on climate change, I'd kind of flagged, I suppose, for discussion that we had that request for resourcing. We've had that request for transparency in a specific page on our website, which to me goes further in terms of some kind of integrated strategy, which may include, the way that we consider this as part of our council decision making and flowing through to our reporting and things like that through to council. So, if, as you say, there is a degree of resourcing needed, how do we propose to address that through the LTP?
So there are two main ways to address that through the Mayor. The first one is acknowledging the extremely tight budget that we're operating under, that council officers need to manage that requirement through attrition or through reprioritising existing resources. Or the alternative is to put another FTE back into the budget to deliver on matters of changing climate.
So further to that, do we have the ability at the moment to reprioritise any existing staff's workload? And if not, recognising that we're managing attrition, do we have a vacancy that could potentially be repurposed to provide a resource to this?
Yes.
To which bit?
There's two parts to that. I think we are currently, Fleur Lincoln in the strategic planning space is very passionate about this area and will be able to provide some enthusiastic impetus into particularly on this side of it. And then we also have within the district planning part of city development, we are able to accommodate a current position or reframe that for this purpose.
Open that up for councillors to share their views on the potential repurpose of an existing vacancy to be dedicated as a climate change resource. Lots of nodding.
Yeah. Support. While we're on the topic, Your Worship, there was also a request, I think, for you to look at signing the Climate Change Accord.
It was on my notes too.
Perfect, and I just wonder if we could just flag that maybe in discussion, that's something that we look into.
Refer to my notes.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think even though we have acknowledged the need for a subject matter expert in this area to help bring council's work together, I've also heard that council would be instructing us potentially to bring a climate change or a changing climate strategy back to council so we can show how we're assessing all of these multiple advocacy and delivery. So I would include things like the Mayor's role and the councillor's leadership in that overarching strategy.
By extension, would that also include what I see as a clear partnership with HBRC, as they've also got a dedicated investment in climate change and a person to drive that from their aspects? So how we align in that strategy with other LTAs?
We've had some preliminary discussions with HBRC and also a number of the industries that are Napier specific as to how we might take that forward in terms of a partnership with a wider sector. Just before we carry on there, while they're working on the wording, I would add to that we would absolutely be working in partnership with HBRC, but acknowledging our points of difference in terms of both regulation and our way forward. And I would add the community to that partnership as well.
And just before you jump in, Councillor Brown, would that work also help us define what is our carbon footprint as an organisation and what measurements we might use? I assume it would, but it hasn't been mentioned. So
I know that through Madam Mayor, I know that everyone has been particularly busy over the last 24, 48 hours, potentially 10 years, but central government has announced, the Commission for the Environment has made comment on central government's climate change policy, which will lead us down that path, Councillor Tapane. But I would potentially put on the table that our focus would be about what is Napier City Council's unique proposition here in the discussion of changing climate, and not just our contribution to climate change mitigation, but a focus on our community's adaptation going forward. So that means things like our connection to community, the work that we're doing underground that you've committed to through the long-term plan for resilience to increase consequence of storms, for example, and it would extend right through to our connection with community in terms of resilience going forward. So that's a pretty long way of saying we would look absolutely like any employer would at our impact and climate change mitigation, but I would imagine our focus as a council would be on our community's adaptation.
Councillor Price.
Just a quick question. Would you envisage that we would have a paragraph on our papers that go to council that tell the public that we...
So essentially, we have a number of key areas that we cover off in all council papers in the introduction of a climate change to say, show it's been considered.
So part of an overarching strategy would be looking at all of the levers that we have to commit to our climate change portfolio, and one of those, which is used by a number of councils, is our assessment in papers. While there is a lot to discuss here, council officers have been looking at all of the different metrics that you can use to monitor how we are performing in this space, and at this stage we've been looking at the UN Sustainability Development Goals. That is a set of benchmarks that have been used by many different corporates and other organisations, particularly in Napier. So part of our ability to fully report on that would be council agreeing on which metrics and which measurements to use. And how to localise those measurements and metrics, which is a more mature step to take, not just measuring against a international one, but localising that and getting some co-design with our community around that. So there will be multiple different things that we can do and that we are already doing, but I think hearing from the community and understanding some of the views that have been put to us, I think it's about us getting some resourcing and bringing back all of those options to council at a later date.
So I would see that that would very much be a part of the work being undertaken by this identified resource in conjunction with the development of our climate change strategy. Councillor Brown and then Councillor McGrath.
Thank you. I think for me the other part of the conversation is what we can do to reduce the emissions that are on the left-hand side there. And I suppose it comes down to one of the most visible ways we can do that is reducing or encouraging more active transport and reducing vehicle movements. And I'm guessing out of a strategy, some of that stuff might fall out. So my question is around, do we have the flexibility within our existing transport budgets to be able to take a step change in that should a strategy come out saying we want to remove cars from a certain part of town or something?
Through you, Madam Mayor, there's not a great degree of flexibility at this stage, but I might ask Robin if he's still here to talk briefly to the transportation strategy and where we're at with that. Please. And also just reiterating that the Climate Change Commission's advice will feed into this, which none of you would have had the time to read yet.
Remove car parks from VGA.
Through you, Your Worship. The budgets that we've currently got do include some walking and cycling facilities. There aren't a great deal of walking and cycling specific projects. The idea being that we will actually try and incorporate better facilities throughout all the work we do, so any intersection improvements, any corridor improvements, any local area traffic management that we were discussing yesterday, they will all be centred probably around walking and cycling, making sure those facilities are better, and certainly that the opportunities are there for people to use. There are some separate smaller programmes to try and improve things like trip end facilities, so cycle storage in the CBD. And then we've got a couple of business case programmes for some of the, I guess, the real sticking points in journeys into town, so the area by the Z petrol station. So that whole area is a pretty unappealing route to get into town. So it's just those last bits of the journey in many cases. But certainly the projects that we've got identified at the moment will all have elements of walking and cycling in them. We could always do more. But I guess the other thing to note is that the transportation strategy, which you'll all remember we had a few workshops on, but a little while ago now, we will be bringing that to council for approval to go out to consult, hopefully in the July round of council meetings. And there are certainly more policies and more leanings in that document to support council moving in that direction of providing better walking and cycling facilities, and more inviting facilities, and obviously the safety issues as well.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and noting that this has been a theme throughout many of the discussions today, I do feel it is necessary to point out that Waka Kotahi recently announced its indicative budgets for continuous improvement programs, and Napier City Council was not successful in seeking the level of funding that we had deemed to be required for a number of our continuous programs. Difficult timing with respect to the release, and ourselves and councils around the country going into long-term plan hearings. We have till the 30th of June to make submissions on the indicative fundings that have been allocated to ourselves, and we will make a submission on the basis of the work program ahead. But I make that in the spirit of there is not a lot of flexibility here for us to make changes within our program. In fact, we will be, to a degree, needing to reduce some of the work that we needed to do. Not strictly related to your question per se, but it is very much in the context of how we're operating at the moment.
So further to that, I guess another example of how, unfortunately, decisions that are being made at central government level are directly affecting the ability for us to provide the services and infrastructure that our community needs. So that is going to be quite challenging to do our planning in the next few years. Councillor Brown.
Just to tease it out a little bit more, so is there anything we can do to increase the flexibility? So have we gone too detailed in our line items, and if we went a bigger package, would that be able to create more flexibility, or is it just...
That would be a question I'd have to take on notice, unless there is someone else in the room that can answer that. I think it would be easy to answer from gut feel, but I think it's actually a deeper question. Yeah.
Just to supplement that, the work programme that we do give to Waka Kotahi is more detailed, so it does have individual projects on it, and that gets approved on the merit of each of those projects. So while we don't have them described individually in the long-term plan, we've got them rolled up into safety or capacity improvements, for instance. They're all detailed individually with Waka Kotahi and then approved for the 3-year programme.
Councillor McGrath, did you still have...
Just on the climate change and providing a resource, that seems to be a change in our thinking, because by supplying an actual resource. And part of our thinking initially was making sure we didn't have someone just sitting at a desk writing more reports, because we wanted outputs, we wanted action, we wanted something delivered. So I think if we're talking about resourcing, then we need to be thinking what those outputs and what the delivery will actually be, rather than someone warming a perceived council chair spending rates money. So.
Thank you for that question, Councillor McGrath. I'll ask Richard to answer that, as we have put a bit of thought in behind that. Thank you.
Thanks, Steph. The resource is, our ability at the moment to coordinate what I've got on the board up there and to provide, I guess, the necessary energy and effort to bring that thinking together in a coherent and meaningful way, where we can really do the best in the climate change space. We just don't have that ability without some focused resource. So this is not someone that's going to bang out reports. This is somebody that is actually going to coordinate all, both the
hopefully the political arm and what we're doing underneath there towards having purposeful climate change action for the council.
Thank you. And sorry, just further to that too, a key part of having a resource allocated to this is a point of contact for our members and ratepayers to reach into, for HBRC to connect to, but also potentially quite untapped by Napier at the moment is our ability to reach into funding opportunities to deliver the work that is required for our climate change adaptation. And that could be central government, as we've just been talking about. It could be to address some of the significant changes that are on the horizon with respect to government's climate change policy, or it could be philanthropy. So it's a dedicated resource that would do more than write reports.
Yeah, like so, hopefully they'll be able to present what we've actually achieved, not what we're hoping to achieve or what box we want to tick off for the government. Other than that, it's just a comms person. So.
And to provide some assurity and potential confidence to council, I will get the detail of this wrong, so forgive me, but officers have already, to a degree, been through our 500 odd line items of business and ascertained whether they are contributing to climate change adaptation or not. So a lot of that work has been done. I do think that there is legitimacy in report writing at this stage when we're talking about developing a strategy that everyone, including the community, can buy into. But there has been a significant amount of work done in this space, and what we're asking for really is a leader to the connect across all business units.
Councillor Bogue and then Councillor Tapani.
In the submission from Bike Hawke's Bay, they pointed out to us that in our LTP we've got 2.2 million over 10 years for car parking and 473,000 for new cycle and walking tracks. So this is in contrast with the Climate Change Commission's target to get more people walking, cycling and using public transport by the end of 2022. So I just wanted to make that point, that it doesn't look like what we're planning is really consistent with that particular goal.
And through you, Madam Mayor, and not specifically with respect to Bike Hawke's Bay submission, of which we have all heard, but I do think some of the challenges with our thinking here is that we are a provincial city and we do service a much wider area and we are an events-driven city as well. So you can get our ratepayers biking and walking and using transport, but we do service a province.
Councillor Tappan.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. It's just a comment, more of a commendation, really. And I concur with the comments that have been particularly spoken by Councillor Crown around. I've noticed that over the last 12 months, we've identified a number of opportunities where we could really tell our story a lot better. We do a lot in our decision making and in our rationalising and in the efforts and assignment of resources that are around addressing the needs of our community and climate change. And so I think I agree with Councillor Crown that I look forward to us getting better at sharing our successes with our community. But also, I'd like to commend our staff and this council. For me, this is the first step in really defining where we might start walking in the climate change space. And I'm genuinely excited by the indicators that the Chief Executive has given around how we might approach those various opportunities. And I would commend our staff for getting us to this point, and for our council and our staff for looking at opportunities around where we can go forward. Ngā mihi.
Thank you, Councillor Tapani. Adele.
And just through the Mayor, I just wanted to also make comment that we are in the preparation now for our final long-term plan, and I just want to let you know that we are including a statement around climate change for the public and for Council to acknowledge. So I just wanted to make sure that we're actually acknowledging that as a separate area within the long-term plan final. And also my other comment is that we're currently doing some work around organising to do our emissions to actually understand what they are as a benchmark going forward as well. So we're undertaking that work.
Great. Thank you. So just to summarise, we currently have an action here to direct council officers to repurpose an existing vacancy to create a position which will take the lead on climate change, including the development of a climate change strategy, and that we will investigate becoming a member of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Change or similar association.
Great.
And
Have a media release on this.
okay, so I think this is probably some of the conversation that moved into the sort of active transport space, and that is probably a nice segue into what's next on my list, which is CBD parking. And the challenges, obviously, that we have in this space, where we are trying to find that balance between encouraging people to be more climate change focused in their transport and ways of moving around the city, and at the same time we are getting a lot of feedback that we have a car park issue in our CBD in particular. So I guess perhaps a little bit of a summary of what we do currently have in our budget and our parking strategy might be helpful, and then open up for some questions from councillors.
Currently, we do have money available to continue, I guess, down the project of demolition of the old bus station on the end of Herschel Street, and developing that area by into integrating that with the rest of the car park. So that'll provide a new leased car park facility down in the area of town where we most need it.
Sorry to interrupt, but how many additional car park spaces will that create?
I think it's about 40.
And that's leased?
Well, at this stage, it's a reshuffle. That car park has leased and usual car parking in it,
yeah.
paid parking. So what we have done there is we've formally closed the road, which leads between. There's a road that splits the buildings off from that car park, so that's formally closed. So the whole area can now be integrated, and it's a little bit. It's a bit messy, the current configuration. So we'd be realigning it more than creating. I don't think it's useful to see it as 40 new leased car parks. It's an overall package because it integrates with the current public car park.
Okay, so 40 car parks in total additional.
Yeah.
That may be a combination of leased and paid by hour parking type
Yeah, well,
scenario.
there will be additional 40 car parks, I guess, is the easiest thing to think about. How that's split exactly, we can come back to you with the detail on that. And the other thing I think is worth noting is that there are changes afoot in the CBD in terms of particularly towards or with Dalton House into the near future, where there is quite a substantial office change going out of the CBD towards as they're rebuilding their premises elsewhere, which will mean that there will be quite a reduced leased car park component from the books. So that'll be in a couple of years' time.
Okay.
Oh, MSD, but not the courthouse.
So is that the only major, that Herschel Street one, that's the only major car park project currently in the work program?
Yes, that's right.
Right, open up for...
Madam Chair, can we just clarify, what's the current percentage of occupancy in the leased car parks? Is there a waiting list? And how is that being planned to be satisfied?
I know there's a significant waiting list. It's close to 200 people. Would that
There
be
is a
right?
waiting list which has actually been reducing over recent times. I don't have the figures right with me at the moment. Yeah, but there is a waiting list at the moment. At the same time, there seems to have been a change lately where some of our car parking on the periphery, the cheaper lease options, are no longer being taken up. So it's our usage.
Charge more.
Yeah, our usage is. It seems to me that we actually have a less pressure on the car parking. I know that you've received submissions to the contrary, but it doesn't seem the evidence is for Debbie and her parking team is that there's actually people not even willing to go to Edward Street, for example. That car park has now got spaces. Yeah.
And I guess we've got two separate components to this because we've got lease parking and we've got people that are just driving into the CBD and want to duck into the bank and can't find a car park anywhere close. Bearing in mind, I know how terrible we all are because I do it myself at wanting to get something right outside. But there does seem to be a real congestion in the CBD itself in terms, I often hear from people that just give up and go home because they couldn't find a park.
So just a couple of comments about that is council recently made some changes to the car parking time tenures, and I think it's worth waiting to see the impact of that. And the other thing I would say is that we are trying to give better information, more easily accessible information about car parking on the websites and those sorts of things so that people know what their options are, because I don't think that's entirely intuitive at the moment either. And I think those two things alone might make quite a bit of difference to some of that kind of angst around finding a car park, a public car park for someone coming to the CBD for a couple of hours.
Councillor Tapani.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. A question to you, please, Richard. I know that might have been 2 years ago that we did a vehicle and pedestrian assessment of the CBD and surrounding area as a part of building the strategy for how we might address parking and pedestrian and traffic movements within the city. Given the submissions, so that's where we're starting from for my question, given the submissions we've had last LTP and this LTP and the indications provided by the Chief Executive around what we want to do in the climate change space, to create those sorts of avenues or streets or active transportation modes. Between that assessment we did 2 years ago and the desire to have those types of infrastructures in the future, do we have a strategy or what's the next step for us to get us from that strategy to the suggestions that we've received in the LTP? What in your opinion, is the next step for us?
I could wave a magic wand, I guess, and but no, I think really what we do need to do is start really trying to give some good, consistent climate change type messaging through, good, strong policy development in that area, and then working with our public and giving them the time to make the kind of adjustment and come on the journey of that. Because I think if it's just a mechanical thing of, right, suddenly we introduce an offering that hasn't been socialised properly and hasn't been well considered, it's just going to get rejected by the public. So I think we definitely have work to do in that space, and that hopefully is why we've been asking for a resource in that, so that we can focus on those kind of issues of making real change, for our community into the future.
All right.
Just focusing on your comment around people actually going round and round and then just going home, that comment really concerns me for several reasons. Our retailers are under incredible pressure, particularly Lower Emerson Street at the moment, and they're under pressure because of Kmart opening up. There's been a noticeable impact. And so if people can't come and shop there or find that there's a barrier to shopping, then that's going to directly impact on the vibrancy of our CBD. So I see this as quite a serious issue, and trying to balance that with our move towards, trying to be more sustainable and everything like that, and climate change. That's all very well and good, but the reality on the ground right now is that there is either a perceived or real barrier to people coming into town and shopping, and that has a direct impact on our retailers and our economy and our city vibrancy. So I'd like to see some real solutions to this problem about how we're going to support our retailers.
If I may, through you, Your Worship, we do have a fair bit of capacity around the CBD. It tends to just be that one street further out. That's obviously what Richard's team have been working on to try and make those spaces more desirable to a wider range of users. I think there is probably a bit of an onus on us as council to make sure that the links from those areas into town are as easy and as safe as they can be. But there's, for instance, the Marine Parade between the Six Sisters and the Cape View office. You rarely see more than sort of 50% of those spaces used. Likewise around Clive Square, there's a lot of space in there. It's just about managing some of that space and then making sure it works for the shopper. We have got somewhere to go, but we are in dropping the speed limit and other minor works trying to make the CBD more pedestrian friendly, so people don't feel the urge maybe to get right outside the shop, so they can feel safer and more welcome actually walking a bit further.
Just a caution around that everything that we do has an impact, and if it negatively impacts the retail businesses in the CBD, then we could end up with no viable CBD.
Councillor Mawson, then Councillor Crystal.
I appreciate that part of what we're talking about here is a submission from a cycling group who clearly would want to advocate for cycling. How many people here are going to sell their vehicle and get on an e-bike to go to town? So what I'm saying here is that we're moving to an electric environment, we're going to electric cars, which will still need car parks to park. So we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. So they're using a climate change as an avenue, and I appreciate that, to push cycling as an active thing, and that's great. But the electric cars will still need car parks.
Councillor Crystal.
One of the things I've noticed is obviously Saturdays are probably the worst days for parking, and a lot of the leased parks are empty because they're used during the week. So is there some sort of way that the leased car parks can be available on weekends for the general public?
They already are.
They are, all of them?
And there may be a degree of education required,
Yeah,
or,
well, a lot
knowledge
of people
building
don't know
around
that.
that. Yeah, I know it does say it on the signs, but
Most people wouldn't
And-
know that because it says private parking or leased parking.
Just a quick comment on that. I think I hinted at it before, but we've got a lot of work to do, I think, in making people aware of what is available. And I have to say too that as much as I like the changes that we're doing, like it's hard for people to get used to change as well. So we've got to think of ways to kind of publicise what, where the parks are basically, where they are available, and give that certainty of product to our people, because it's very difficult for them to know if we've changed the rules suddenly that they have to do that. So we're putting some thought into that, because I think as Robin is hinting at, there's more there than people are aware of, and it's about joining the dots with their perception of, so they know actually where to park their car, and if it's a few minutes more walking, but they know that, it makes it much more easier to make that choice rather than circling.
Deputy Mayor Brosnan and then Councillor McGrath.
I'd like to concur with the comments Councillor Mawson made. So I've had an opportunity, I suppose, to read a little bit of the Climate Change Commission's report that's just recently been released, and that does talk about all cars being imported by 2035 needing to be electric vehicles, and that we as a transportation system are going to be decarbonised by 2050. So that will rock around extremely quickly from an infrastructure perspective. Whilst I appreciate everything council officers are telling us around the need to better inform and educate our community around available parking spots, I don't see the demand for inner city parking going down to any degree in the future. And I personally am really supportive of us working on essentially building more parking in the CBD, and I'd like to hear a little bit about the proposal that we had round by the Can, because I think we have a parking issue at that end of town, particularly around the War Memorial Centre. And I also would like to hear a little bit about the plans around adding a second story to the Dickens Street 2 car parks that we have there. I think we talked about those in previous years. And also adding a third story next to the municipal. You know, all of those seem like really practical solutions to me that, you know, we don't hear a lot about in terms of what's happening on the ground. And is there any way that we can fast track the actual construction of these as part of our LTP? Question for staff, I suppose, around are those projects still on the radar? Are any of them budgeted as part of the LTP, and if not, I suppose why not?
So the CAN one is the one that we are focusing on at the moment. It's the one I mentioned before.
Yeah.
So that's the one that we can bring back to you, I guess, to see the progress. The other, in terms of putting the second deck on, that's not in consideration at the moment. Yeah, but the focus is, and I guess the budget for parking as well, which is, has been reduced over the recent times, probably won't extend too much further than beyond the CAN project, and then you will have to wait until the fund replenishes.
Or look at
just,
loan funding.
sorry to interrupt, but can I just get some clarification around that? Because I was of the understanding we still had $6.1 million in our parking reserve, and I would be not very happy if that was being used to just create 40 new car parks.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Through you, that's, I guess, one of the things we were looking at there was whether or not we do put a deck in that corner as well. Which, yeah, so no, if it's just the 40 car parks, that's quite right. There is still, that won't cost $6 million.
Pleased to hear.
But yeah, we were thinking of, or at least before we go, as part of that project, to look at, because it's sort of set into the hill there, it's a good place to be able to build a car parking building. So we were looking at the feasibility of that.
For you, Your Worship, could I just follow up on that? I think that's great, that project, and my apologies, I hadn't connected those two discussions. My thinking as well is that we're obviously looking at that parking fund as a upfront capital cost and drawing down on that fund, but obviously we have the ability to leverage that funding in a different way in terms of servicing loans. We know that if we were to build additional parking infrastructure, those are essentially income generating assets for council back into the parking fund, and that we have the ability to possibly use that money to leverage loans and make that intergenerational, the investment in parking. So I'm just thinking with $6.1 million in that fund, I don't see any reason why we couldn't be pursuing more than one parking project, and that would be my preference for the CBD.
Just while Adele's getting her answer to that one through you, Madam Mayor, I suppose on a case-by-case basis, absolutely be looking at these things, but my general comment is to the question about fast-tracking and just asking council to consider the overall deliverability of the plan with respect to our capital budgets going forward, and the issues that we have with regional procurement across Hawke's Bay at the moment. So Just wanted to put that in there. Thanks, Adele, specifically to the question of loan funding.
Yeah, so certainly that is something that we could look at. We obviously made a decision through this long-term plan to partially take some of the funding that we traditionally had going from parking into that fund. So the replenishment has been reduced going forward. So just noting that that's also at play, but also the parking strategy is that longer-term vision around what's happening, where you're going in that space, and what level of provision and how far away it's going to be. So that all plays into it.
Can I put on the table that we actually take an opportunity now to review our parking strategy, which has up until this point in time, I know, focused on sort of finding smaller fringe spaces to create new car parks, but actually take the opportunity to review again some of these historical propositions around adding additional decks to inner city car parks. And alongside that, I think we also need to let the current changes that have been made play out and see how they impact overall, and also undertake and incorporate it into our strategy the need to ensure that our community are aware of the inner city car park opportunities that perhaps they don't know are there at the moment. And so I guess to wrap it all up, I'm suggesting that we do need to take a really good looking at our parking strategy, acknowledge that we need to let some of the changes that have already been made have an impact, but also recognising that we don't see in the short or medium term the likelihood of a much lower volume of cars in our CBD. So we do need to look again at what sort of opportunities we have in building new car park facilities. Councillor Mawson, then Councillor McGrath.
And also put in an accessibility lens over that as well?
Yes, I was going to raise that too.
Actually, that was the comment I was going to make once everyone had finished playing car parks, is it was actually brought up a few times and over the last few LTPs, is we are not doing our disabled car parks well at all. And it does keep coming around. I know we've just done a strategy, but I think it needs to be a priority. I got a shock yesterday when we found out there was 2,500 mobility card holders in Napier, and when you walk around the place, there's not very many parks at all. I don't think we're doing it well at all. In fact, we're not, because we're being told we're not doing it well. And I'd like us to acknowledge that here today and actually come up with a commitment that we will either work with one of the disability groups or actually just go out and get it sorted. Get some car parks out there for our mobility card holders. Are we able to get some sort of commitment today from staff or whoever that we can do this and prioritise it?
Natasha wanting to talk, and then Councillor Wright.
Through the Mayor, just in response to the comment raised around the disability strategy implementation, we do have that as a priority for this coming financial year. It has been delayed, as has a couple of other strategies in terms of implementation, given our year in 2020. And the car parking review in terms of mobility parking is actually a priority of that strategy. So I'm very confident that we will see some action on that.
Just one of the car parks that was brought up was over in Ahuriri, and that comes up time and time again. Is there any opportunity that we could just look at that standalone, and if there's no car parks over in the Ahuriri area, that we fast track something?
Through the Mayor, we have had ad hoc requests over the last couple of years, which we have dealt with parking on an individual basis. So I'm sure we can do that for that particular car park too.
Excellent, thank you.
And finally, through you, Madam Mayor, I did make contact with Michelle yesterday from CCS to acknowledging that she's new to the region and I'm new to the region. So we will continue to get their reports and to build our relationships there.
I'll follow up on that one.
Yeah. Question for Robin, if I may.
I'm sorry, Councillor Wright was waiting.
If I can just make a comment that this is going to be a growing problem as our population ages, we're going to see more and more people issued with these disability car park passes. And I know that I think we have to consider that this is a limited resource, and maybe there needs to be some education around those passes, because a lot of people get temporary ones, and then a lot of people get permanent ones, and I don't know if they're reviewed. And I know that that some people see people using these car parks and wonder why they are as well. And sometimes the disability is quite hidden, so it becomes an issue. But I think there needs to be a coordinated approach, is what I'm saying, around the criteria around who gets them going into the future, as they become they're a valuable resource, and if too many people get them, it becomes an issue. So something at that end, as well as our response to the fact that there will be a growing number of people who require them. And I don't know if I made any sense with that, but...
I can respond to that too through the Mayor. That has been identified through the development of the strategy, particularly from mobility park users, in terms of the some of the attitudes that could be targeted towards them, particularly with hidden disabilities. The CCS actually run the mobility process in the scheme, so I think close work with them in terms of educational campaigns, which have been done right around the world. So there's some really good examples of those, and as well as making sure that their processes align with our resources is a really valid point. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Brosnan, Councillor Simpson, and then Councillor Tapani.
Just had a suggestion from staff, and I think it's a good one, that the parking being the complex issue that it is, when we have a workshop, it might be helpful to be a public workshop so that we get all of those occupancy issues kind of out in the public, and that there's a bit of an understanding around how complex it is and what all the options and issues we have are. I think that would be really good for transparency.
Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity here to think outside the square, and I think while it's important that we look at the issues in the CBD, people have got to remember that there's some really excellent, like Taradale's an excellent retail shopping centre, and there's excellent parking available, particularly in White Street. So people should consider thinking outside the square and go shop at Taradale.
Yeah. Fabulous plug there for your ward, Councillor Simpson.
There's a bit of retail space available at the moment too.
And that could form part of the education that we are sharing with our community about parking options available, not just in the CBD but in our other urban retail areas. Councillor Tapani.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. So I'd welcome the formation or the opportunity to revisit the parking strategy. But when the opportunity does arise, I'd also love to know how we are able to assess who's using those disability parks, whether it is people with valid permits or whether we have people like me that just see an empty space and just plug in there. So would like the opportunity to better understand the challenges when we come to reviewing the strategy. Kia ora.
Through Your Worship, yeah, we do have some of that data. Obviously, that's mostly gathered by the enforcement team. We don't have the ability to truly monitor the hourly use or the hourly occupation of any of those spaces. We do have to be a little bit careful in making sure we don't allocate too many spaces, and I say this because we get a few requests and then it'll be just one person trying to get to one shop. We need to help those people, but at the same time, blue badge holders can park anywhere. So there's always a sort of an end stall or a wider or an angle park that can be used. But as you say, often if it's a hidden disability, then they don't need the full width of the mobility space or necessarily a dropped curved. If they're ambulant disabled, it's just the proximity to the destination that's the important thing for them. So there's quite a lot of balance, and particularly a smaller area like Hariri, where there's 15 parks shared by all those shops and cafes. If 2 of those were turned over to mobility spaces, it could possibly affect business there. So it's an ongoing review and certainly the feedback we get from the enforcement team will tell us if those spaces are being used at all or rarely or very well used, and we'll look at supplementing them.
Thank you, Robin. This is clearly a very complex subject that I think we could carry on discussing for hours, so I'm going to suggest that we park it for now. I'll just do a quick wrap-up of what we've noted as actions, and we do have a lunch break at 12:30. So just to read out what we've noted here, we've got that council officers review the parking strategy, establish current parking changes impact, and investigate historical proposition of additional decks to existing car park buildings. 2, immediately investigate accessible parking in the Aharere suburb, and citywide review to be completed by December 2021. And 3, to provide CBD car parking topography and information on the website. Does anyone feel we need to add anything additional in there?
I totally understand the need for more car parking in the city, but in terms of our climate change responsibilities, it would be helpful to have it dovetail in with a cycling strategy or an active transport strategy, which shows not only where all the car parks are and are going to be in the CBD, but also what are we doing to make it safer for pedestrians and for cyclists as well. I know this is a bit of an add-on, but it seems to go against, I know it's in response to the need, but it does go against what we're trying to do in terms of climate change, which is reduce, the fewer cars that are on the road, the safer it is for cyclists and pedestrians. So, if we could somehow dovetail this in with a cycling strategy, because I don't think we have one.
We do have the transport strategy, which is about to come through to us, which I'm suggesting would include all of the users of our transportation networks. So I certainly agree that we need to be ensuring that the parking strategy and transport strategy are actually interwoven. I don't know that we need to specifically mention that in here, but
Madam Chair, can I just get a clarification? Does our parking strategy incorporate cycle parking? The locations and volume of parking. The more that people realise they can't get a car park in town, if they're in a proximity where they can say, I'll hop on my e-bike and be in there in a couple of minutes and it'll save me the hassle of driving around for half an hour, do we have a good indication or a good mapping or whatever it is, public vision of where suitable cycle parks are? And that would obviously then blend the two strategies nicely. But again, there's plenty of parking out in Taradale.
It's a long way to bike though.
Richard, do we?
You'll recall those that were involved in the parking strategy, that was quite a conservative piece of work. So it was really looking at primarily the leased parking versus the on-street kind, or the sort of pay and display kind of things, the hourly rate ones, daytime parking commuter. So I think it really, and what it was trying to achieve there was an understanding of what we were trying to do to put leased car parking on the fringes of the CBD and keep the middle of it open for the daily shoppers and those that are, coming in. So it's a relatively low base to work with, and there's a lot you can add into that strategy to make it richer and cover, the sort of things you're talking about now.
And I have just extended point 3 on here, that it's not just the CBD, but also our urban shopping areas, the car park topography and information on our website. Councillor. Right, so we will break for lunch now. I'm not sure actually what had been.
We moved in 10 minutes.
Half an hour, so we reconvene at 1.
12 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, just before we go.